Have you ever questioned whether the people closest to you are hiding life-altering secrets? For James Wilson, that question became a shattering reality when his wife's deathbed confession revealed their four children, the teenagers he'd raised, coached, and loved, weren't biologically his. But it's what happened next that transformed this personal tragedy into something more complex. The mysterious letter his wife left behind connected the dots to someone James never suspected, his oldest friend. Today, we're investigating how this revelation unfolded, exposing not just one betrayal, but a calculated deception that destroyed two families and left everyone questioning what makes someone a real parent. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors. James Wilson held his wife's thin hand as her breathing grew labored. After 20 years of marriage, he expected final words of love or gratitude. Instead, she gripped his fingers with sudden urgency and whispered, "The kids, they're not yours." The machines kept beeping. The clock kept ticking. But James's world stopped. She died minutes later, leaving behind more questions than answers. Among her belongings, James found a folded note addressed to him. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Find Michael. He knows," just 5 words that would unravel everything. Michael wasn't just a family friend, he'd been James's closest confidant since secondary school. The man who'd stood beside him at their wedding. The godfather to their eldest child. Studies show 1 in 9 men who take paternity tests discover they're not the biological father. James became part of that statistic overnight. But this wasn't just biological, it was emotional calculus. Every birthday party, every school play, every time he'd called them "my kids" suddenly took on a different weight. The children ranged from 8 to 17 years old. This deception hadn't been a one-time affair. It spanned nearly 2 decades. Why confess now? Guilt seems too simple. Maybe it was the morphine loosening her lips. Or perhaps facing mortality. She couldn't bear to die with the lie intact. The letter suggested more layers. That summer by the lake in 2003, when James and Michael had gone fishing for 2 weeks, kept resurfacing in his mind. His wife had stayed behind, claiming work commitments. Now he wondered what really happened during those empty days. Medical implications added another dimension. The children's health histories might be incomplete without accurate genetic information. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a practical concern. Allergies, conditions, predispositions, everything he thought he knew about their medical backgrounds could be wrong. Real cases mirror this devastation, like the Nigerian man who collapsed into a 7-day coma after a DNA test revealed his children weren't biologically his. Or the father who only discovered the truth when a child's blood test showed incompatible genotypes. James wasn't just losing the past, he was losing the future he'd imagined. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren. The note's reference to Michael suggested coordination, not coincidence. This wasn't a drunken mistake between strangers, it was systematic. Years of birthday parties where Michael held his kids, Christmases where he brought gifts, inside jokes James never understood. Every memory now had to be re-examined like evidence at a crime scene. Psychologists note deathbed confessions often stem from a need for absolution. But hers came with no apology, no explanation, just instructions to find Michael. The lack of closure magnified the hurt. If she'd confessed years earlier, would it have been easier? Would therapy have helped them rebuild? Now there were only graveside questions and a letter burning a hole in his pocket. James stood in the hospital parking lot, staring at his phone. One call would start the confrontation. Michael would answer with that familiar chuckle, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Two families stood to collapse, James's and Michael's own wife and kids, who knew nothing. The children's reactions were unpredictable. Some might reject him entirely. Others, like studies suggest, might cling harder to the only father they'd ever known. As he dialed, James realized this wasn't just about biology. It was about trust excavated to its foundations. The same hands that had built their family life would now tear it apart brick by brick. And it would start with 3 words: "We need to talk." Should James confront Michael or protect his children from the truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The letter sat heavy in James's hands, its edges frayed from years of storage. The date matched that summer in 2003, the lake house vacation he'd taken with Michael. They'd gone fishing for 2 weeks, leaving his wife behind. At the time, she'd claimed her workload was too heavy. Now the truth crashed over him. While he was gutting fish with Michael, his friend was also betraying him back home. Digging through old photo albums felt like assembling evidence against his own life. Then he found it, a snapshot from that summer. His wife and Michael stood arm in arm on their back porch, heads tilted together in a way that now screamed intimacy. The date stamp confirmed it was taken just 3 days after James had left town. What he once dismissed as harmless camaraderie now painted a damning picture. They hadn't even waited until he was fully gone. Studies show approximately 4% of American men unknowingly raise children who aren't biologically theirs. The numbers vary by region, socioeconomic status, even religious affiliation. James found himself obsessing over these statistics, wondering how many other husbands had stared at similar photos, reassessing every glance and inside joke. The first letter mentioned a summer by the lake. The phrase made his stomach turn, but beneath it in the desk drawer was another envelope, slightly yellowed with age. This one was addressed to Michael in his wife's handwriting. The seal was unbroken, suggesting she'd never sent it. Inside, 7 words obliterated any remaining hope. "You're the father of all of them." His hands shook as he pieced together the timeline. 4 kids born between 2004 and 2015. The math worked, horribly. This wasn't a one-time fling that produced a single child. Every time they'd planned for another baby, every time they'd picked out names, Michael had been the real father through it all. The family camping trips where Michael always happened to join them. The way he'd buy expensive gifts for the kids. All the puzzle pieces clicked into a grotesque image. A particular memory surfaced when their youngest was born premature. Michael had appeared at the hospital within an hour, despite living across town. At the time, James thought it was just friendship. Now he wondered if Michael had been there to see his child. The letter's contents suggested his wife had kept meticulous records. Maybe she feared Michael would someday deny it. The specificity gutted him. She hadn't just written "our child," she specified all of them, confirming each pregnancy was calculated. The stationery matched what she'd used for their shopping lists, making the betrayal feel domestic. She'd drafted this bombshell between writing milk and bread. James found himself fixating on logistics. His wife must have timed intimacy carefully, ensuring he'd believe the children were his while secretly knowing otherwise. The cold precision of it eclipsed even the sexual betrayal. This wasn't passion, it was forensic-level manipulation spanning a decade. He realized with a dull thud that Michael's wife likely had no idea. Their daughters were classmates. Both families vacationed together annually. The web of deceit extended far beyond his marriage. It had ensnared everyone. DNA tests would later confirm every word of the letter. But in this moment, standing in his dead wife's study with the evidence in hand, James faced a choice: walk away or confront the man who'd played house with his entire life. The letter gave him Michael's phone number, still saved in his wife's contacts under a male co-worker's name. Even in death, she was still revealing new layers to the lie. His thumb hovered over the call button. Part of him wanted to hear Michael's voice crack when confronted. Another part dreaded confirmation that his closest friend, the best man at his wedding, had looked him in the eye for years while living this double life. The letter didn't explain why. Maybe the answer waited on the other end of the line. How do you rebuild a life when every memory feels like a lie? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. James didn't call ahead before showing up at Michael's house. He wanted to see the reaction firsthand. When Michael opened the door, his smile faded instantly at the sight of James holding the letters. "We need to talk," James said, pushing past him into the living room. Michael's hands shook as he read the words his wife had written years earlier. "It was just one time," he blurted out, before even finishing. But the DNA test James had quietly run told a different story. All four children were Michael's biological offspring, conceived over nearly 2 decades of deception. The confrontation didn't stay private for long. Michael's wife walked in during the middle of it, freezing when she caught the tail end of the conversation. Her scream brought the neighbors outside. She threw a vase at Michael, shattering the glass coffee table. "You told me you barely knew her," she yelled. Suddenly, two marriages were imploding at once. James watched numbly as Michael's family fractured in real time, his teenage daughters crying in the hallway, his wife packing a suitcase, the life they'd built dissolving in minutes. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it reflected a broader issue. Reports show paternity fraud affects thousands of American men annually, with legal outcomes varying wildly by state. In Tennessee, lying about paternity is now a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by fines or jail time. But in many other states, men like James face an uphill battle. Even with DNA proof, courts often prioritize the child's stability over biological truth, leaving non-fathers financially responsible for kids they didn't conceive. The deeper James dug, the clearer the pattern became. His wife hadn't slipped up. She'd engineered the deception. When Michael asked why she never told him about the paternity, James showed him the other letter. "She feared I'd leave if I knew." This was premeditated. Every Father's Day card, every school event where James sat in the dad section, she'd orchestrated it all, robbing both men of informed choices. Legal expert Idem Madubuchi notes cases like this often leave victims with limited recourse. While some states allow lawsuits for emotional and financial damages, others dismiss them outright. James faced a nightmare scenario. Legally, he was still the father on all four birth certificates, meaning he could be liable for college tuition and child support, unless he petitioned the courts. But doing so would force the children into legal battles none of them asked for. Meanwhile, Michael's life spiraled. His wife filed for divorce the next morning. His oldest daughter refused to speak to him, while the youngest kept asking if she had to call James dad now. The genetic revelation didn't erase 17 years of parenting. James had changed diapers, treated fevers, taught them to ride bikes, but it did fracture their trust. When Sarah, the eldest, screamed, "You lied to us too," at both men, it underscored the collateral damage. James could have walked away entirely. Some men do. But he kept remembering the terrified look on his 8-year-old's face when rumors started at school. Whatever their biology, they were still the kids he'd raised. The legal system might call him their father, but relationships aren't built on paperwork. As the dust settled, one question lingered. When the children eventually came to him, whether for advice, money, or just familiarity, would he answer as their dad or a stranger? The same hands that had rocked them to sleep now held DNA results that rewrote their history. But biology doesn't erase midnight feedings or graduation speeches. The fallout was only beginning. School registrations, medical forms, inheritance documents all listed James as father. Untangling that legally could take years. But the harder task would be explaining to four confused kids why their family tree had suddenly changed. For now, he kept the letters in a locked drawer, unsure if burning them would erase the past or just make it harder to prove. Have you, or someone you know, been through something like this? Tell us in the comments. Sarah was the first to speak after the DNA results came in. The 17-year-old wrapped her arms around James, her grip tight like she was afraid he'd disappear. "You're my dad," she said into his shoulder. But her 13-year-old brother reacted differently. He kicked a hole in the wall, screaming, "You lied to us too." The two youngest, 11 and 8, just cried quietly, too confused to process what any of it meant. One family, 4 reactions. Some clung to the only father they'd ever known. Others saw him as part of the deception. Michael's wife made things worse. She filed for divorce immediately, but not before confronting James publicly at a school concert. "You ruined everything," she shouted in front of other parents, blaming him for exposing the truth rather than blaming her husband for fathering 4 children outside their marriage. The legal system offered little comfort. A 2024 study found 88.2% of paternity tests are initiated by men, fathers who, like James, needed answers. But getting those answers came at a cost. Some states allow lawsuits for paternity fraud. Others force men to keep paying child support for kids' DNA proofs aren't theirs. James fell into a gray area. Legally, he was still their father on every document, from birth certificates to medical records. The emotional toll on the kids became the hardest part. Sarah started secretly calling him late at night, whispering that her friends didn't understand why she still called him Dad. The middle child refused to look at him for weeks. Medical concerns added another layer. Without accurate family health history, doctors might miss warning signs for genetic conditions. A misdiagnosis could happen because their charts listed James's health background instead of Michael's. James faced impossible choices. Some men walk away entirely. Others fight for parental rights, despite the biology. James tried to stay present without forcing himself where he might not be wanted. He showed up to soccer games, but sat in the back. He paid for school trips but let the kids decide if they wanted him to chaperone. Slowly, a new dynamic emerged, less automatic, more intentional. The 8-year-old started leaving drawings on his porch. The angry teenager eventually asked for help fixing his bike, though he couldn't bring himself to say thanks afterward. The legal mess dragged on. Courts moved slowly on updating birth certificates. School forms still required James's signature. Medical consent became a minefield. If one of the kids needed surgery, who had the right to approve it? James and Michael now shared a bizarre connection, bound by paperwork and DNA, but stripped of any real friendship. Meanwhile, Michael's ex-wife moved across the state with their biological kids, cutting ties completely. Money became another battleground. James had saved for college funds under the assumption they were his children. Did he owe that to them now? Could he afford to pay for 4 tuitions while grappling with the betrayal? The financial strain mirrored the emotional one, constant, draining, with no clear resolution. Psychologists note that children in these situations often struggle with identity. Some spend years torn between loyalty to the man who raised them and curiosity about their biological father. James saw it happening in real time. Sarah researched genetics obsessively, comparing her features to Michael's in old photos. Her brother refused to even say Michael's name. Through it all, James kept coming back to one question: what makes someone a father? The man who changes diapers at 3 a.m., the one who shares DNA, the person listed on a birth certificate. He wasn't just wrestling with his own pain. He was watching 4 kids wrestle with it too. The answer changed depending on which child you asked. Sarah still introduced him as her dad at graduation. Her brother crossed his arms and stayed silent when James walked into the room. The younger two hovered somewhere in between. The fallout didn't end with a single confrontation or court date. It seeped into holidays, birthdays, ordinary Tuesday nights. James's phone buzzed daily, sometimes with a child's text, sometimes with a lawyer's email. The family they'd been was gone. What replaced it was messier, harder, and still evolving. But in those rare moments when Sarah hugged him goodbye before college, when the youngest handed him a Father's Day card signed from your sometimes confused kid, it was enough to keep showing up. For now, that was all he could do. What would you have done in James's place? Stay and rebuild, or walk away to save yourself? James's story reveals more than betrayal. It shows how lies meant to protect can destroy lives. Research indicates 30% of paternity fraud cases involve long-term deception, not one-time affairs. Several states in America debate mandatory testing at birth, but critics argue this could shatter families without consent. Supporters counter that truth matters for medical history, inheritance, and personal identity. No law can undo James's pain, but transparency might prevent future cases. One question remains: is truth always worth the cost? If you were James, would you have preferred living with the lie? Or was the painful truth still better than decades of deception? Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping crime stories and hit the notification bell to stay updated.